Your boots sink into the cold peat with a sound that feels alive, a slow suction of earth against skin. The air bites like iron. Mist creeps low over the marshland, clinging to the reeds and to you. Every breath tastes of rot and rain. Somewhere beneath your feet, something yields soft, human, not quite mud. You freeze. The spade you carry trembles in your grip. You dig again, slower this time, the soil clinging to your gloves in black ribbons. Then the shape emerges, curved like a shoulder, the texture wrong for stone, smoother than bark. You brush it with your sleeve and see flesh, the color of dark honey, gleaming wet beneath the morning light. The scream never leaves your throat. The others come running. They think you have found a cow, maybe a buried thief, but when you clear more of the soil, a face rises from the peat. Eyes closed, mouth relaxed, the lips still full, the lashes still visible. It looks peaceful, far too peaceful. Someone whispers that you should call the police. Someone else swears under their breath, crossing themselves as if to ward off a curse. By the time the authorities arrive, word has spread across the small Danish town. The body is lifted from the ground, wrapped in canvas that leaks black water. The officers look uneasy, their boots sinking in the same soil that guarded this secret for centuries. One of them mutters, "No decay, none at all." Later, under the harsh lamps of the station, a coroner leans close. He studies the rope still biting into the neck, the stubble still visible on the chin. He wipes the skin with a cloth and gasps quietly. This is not a murder victim from last night. This man died before Christ was born. The silence that follows feels heavier than the peat itself. You stand behind the glass, watching the dead man's face in the light. His features are calm, almost serene, as if he knew what was coming and welcomed it. Outside, the rain returns. It taps against the window like fingers, steady, patient, ancient. You realize the bog is still holding its breath. And somewhere beneath the mist, you swear the ground is waiting to open again. The news spreads fast across the Jutland countryside. A body found in the peat. The year is the early 1950s, and Denmark is still pulling itself out of the shadow of war. Farmers are turning the soil for fuel, searching for something to burn through another harsh winter. Instead, they find a man who should have turned to dust long ago. When the Tollund brothers walk into the Silkeborg police station, their clothes are soaked and their faces pale. They tell the officers about the body, the soft skin, the noose, the calm expression. The police drive out with sirens low, tires slipping in mud. They expect the kind of horror that human beings still remember too easily, not ancient mystery. The bog lies silent under a curtain of mist. Wooden planks serve as a narrow path, trembling under the weight of boots. As the men dig, the figure emerges in full curled, eyes closed, hands folded like prayer. He is lying on his side, as if sleeping. The rope still circles his neck, the knot perfectly intact. Someone lights a cigarette. No one speaks. At first, they believe it must be a recent crime. There are no bones showing, no decay, only a faint scent of tannin and wet moss. But the more they look, the more the body seems wrong for the living. The skin has turned the color of walnut oil. The hair, a deep chestnut, clings to the scalp in perfect strands. The eyes are gone, yet the lids remain untouched. The expression serene, almost holy, freezes every man on the site. When the scientists arrive from the National Museum in Copenhagen, they handle him as if he were a relic of faith. They take photographs, sketch measurements, and gently lift him from the earth that preserved him like an offering. The body is placed in a wooden crate lined with straw, the same way ancient farmers would have carried grain. Inside the museum, he lies beneath electric lights for the first time. The experts lean in close, whispering in awe. Radiocarbon tests will soon reveal what none of them can yet believe. The man they call Tollund Man lived and died during the 4th century before the birth of Christ. The discovery sends ripples across Europe. Newspapers call him the sleeping ancestor. journalists write that he looks more alive than the living. Even now, decades later, visitors to Silkeborg Museum still pause before the glass, whispering as though afraid to wake him. For all their science and certainty, no one can explain the peace on his face. And somewhere in that still expression lies a question that begins to gnaw at every witness. Why was he preserved, and what had he done to deserve it? You stand at the edge of a peat bog and look down at the colour of its water, a deep brown that hides the sky. The air smells faintly of smoke, iron, and rot. Scientists say that the bogs of northern Europe are not just wetlands but natural tombs, places where time slows, where the dead refuse to follow the rules of decay. Peat is born from centuries of moss and sedge that never fully decompose, layer upon layer, year after year, pressed into a dense sponge that traps cold and keeps out air. Inside that silence, a strange chemistry takes place. The water turns acidic, rich with humic acid and tannins, the same tannins used to tan leather and preserve hides. The bog becomes a vast, breathing jar of preservation. Flesh does not rot here, it transforms. When the Tollund Man was examined in Copenhagen in the middle of the 20th century, scientists found that his skin had turned supple, smooth, and leathery. The bones beneath had dissolved, leaving only soft tissue, hair, and organs. His eyes had sunk into hollows, yet his eyelids still curved like those of a man dreaming. His hands were folded neatly. Even his fingerprints could be read. The process fascinated biochemists. The bog's cold prevented bacteria from feeding. The lack of oxygen stopped fungi from spreading. The tannins locked the body in a chemical embrace. What began as death became a kind of alchemy, the merging of man and earth into one enduring relic. Across northern Europe, the pattern repeated. In the wetlands of Schleswig-Holstein, in Ireland's County Offaly, and in the Netherlands, farmers stumbled upon faces from the Iron Age, each preserved in the same strange piece. The water and moss had swallowed them whole, and centuries later returned them untouched. Researchers began to notice something else. Many of these bodies were found near ancient pathways, wooden trackways that crossed the bogs. These routes were lifelines for trade and travel, yet they were also sacred boundaries. To the people of the early Iron Age, the bog was neither land nor water. It was a threshold. Anything placed within it, weapon, jewel, or life, was a message to the gods. The scientists recorded every temperature, every chemical level, yet they could not measure the sense of quiet power that lingered in these places. For each preserved face they uncovered, the same realization settled in. Nature itself had been the undertaker, the priest, and the tomb. And if the earth could hold a man for 2,000 years, then perhaps, somewhere beneath your own feet, another waits to be found. The discovery of the Tollund Man was only the beginning. As word spread through the scientific circles of northern Europe, peat cutters, farmers, and historians began to unearth others. Each one emerged from the dark earth, with a story etched not in ink but in skin. They called them the bog people, though they seemed more like spirits preserved in amber than corpses. In a field near the Danish village of Grauballe, a group of workers cutting peat in the early 1950s struck something soft beneath their spades. When they peeled back the wet layers, they found another man face down, throat slit from ear to ear, his mouth open as if still crying out. He became known as Grauballe Man. Like Tollund, his hair still clung to his scalp, his skin still intact, his nails still faintly pink. Forensic experts studied his wounds and concluded the cut had been made by a sharp blade, the work of ritual, not rage. Then came Man, discovered in Cheshire, England, in the 1980s. He had suffered what archaeologists later called the triple death, struck on the head, garroted with a sinew cord, and his throat finally cut, his last breath still trapped in the mud. Around his neck, the knot of the garrote was carefully tied, almost decorative. This was not the chaos of murder, but the choreography of sacrifice. What connected these men across centuries and countries was not how they lived, but how they died. All of them were killed with ceremony, buried in the same watery graves, and left perfectly preserved. None were thrown away in haste. Each was placed with purpose. Scholars soon noticed patterns. Many victims were in their prime, well-fed and groomed. Some bore signs of recent meals heavy with barley and seeds. Others had manicured nails and recently trimmed hair. These were not peasants or prisoners. They might have been priests, nobles, or offerings themselves, people chosen for reasons now lost to history. The idea took shape that these men were part of ancient rituals, offerings to gods of fertility, war, or harvest. To ensure prosperity or atonement, their lives were given to the bog, which served as a bridge between the mortal world and the divine. The still water became both altar and grave. Every new discovery deepened the mystery. None of the bodies showed signs of defensive wounds. None were buried with treasures or tools. It was as if they were meant to travel light into the afterlife. The living could only stare and wonder what kind of faith demanded such peace at the edge of such violence. And the deeper the archaeologists dug, the clearer it became. The bog had chosen its own dead and kept them. The Iron Age people of northern Europe believed that the world was divided not into heaven and hell, but into layers. There was the world of the living, the realm of the gods, and the wet, murky space that connected them both, the bog. It was a place of surrender and offering, where breath met still water, and the earth accepted what the sky demanded. To them, death was not an ending but an exchange. Imagine standing on the edge of a peatland in the early 4th century before the birth of Christ. The air is thick with the scent of burning pine. Torches flicker across a ring of standing stones, their light reflected in the dark pools beyond. In the centre, a bound figure kneels, his wrists tied with braided fibre. His head is bowed. Around him, the tribe chants, low and rhythmic, their words rising into mist. This is not punishment, it is duty. Priests move forward, faces painted with soot, their hair streaked with lime. They whisper to the gods to Nerthus, the Mother Earth who must be soothed, to Odin who demands courage, to the unseen forces that rule the harvest and the storms. The victim is calm. He has eaten his final meal, perhaps barley and seeds, perhaps a stew thick with herbs from the bog's edge. His eyes are closed as they place the cord around his neck. The garrote tightens. The chant rises. When his body slumps, the priest lowers him into the pool. The water accepts him with a hiss, bubbles breaking on the surface. His face disappears beneath the mirror-dark reflection of the sky. The bog seals itself again, silent, satisfied. Centuries later, archaeologists uncover the same scene in fragments. They find bodies positioned as if sleeping, heads bowed, limbs folded. They uncover wooden idols nearby, crude figures carved from oak. In some places, they find entire chariots sunk into the mud, weapons bent before burial, coins scattered like raindrops. Each object is a message to the gods. Each sacrifice a plea to keep chaos at bay. The line between faith and fear was thin in those days. To displease the gods was to risk famine, plague, or flood. To appease them was to offer what mattered most, a life unspoiled by time. In giving blood to the bog, they believed they gave the world its balance. Modern minds struggle to grasp it, yet even now, when you stand beside those wetlands, you can feel the echo of that faith. The ground hums faintly beneath your boots, as if remembering every whispered prayer, every gift it was made to swallow. And deep beneath the moss, the chosen still rest, caught between heaven and earth, between faith and fear. Long after the chanting faded and the fires went cold, the bog still guarded its secrets. Centuries later, when scientists lifted the preserved bodies from their watery tombs, they did not just find skin and hair. They found the remains of the victims' final moments, and in their stomachs, the story of their last meal. When Tollund Man's body was examined in Copenhagen in the middle of the 20th century, the scientists opened his stomach with surgical precision. Inside, they found a simple porridge of barley, flax, and wild seeds. Some of the grains were from weeds that only grew near the edges of bogs and ponds. The mixture contained no meat, no fruit, no luxury. It was food born of ritual, not of comfort. Radiocarbon analysis showed it had been cooked shortly before his death, eaten warm on a cold morning. Grauballe Man's stomach told a similar story. His final meal contained more than 60 kinds of seeds, some poisonous, others bitter. To the Iron Age mind, each had meaning. Some symbolized fertility, others renewal. A few represented endurance through winter. The scientists believed it was a ceremonial dish, eaten not for nourishment but as a passage, a bridge between life and death. Forensic studies revealed even more haunting details. The porridge had been boiled long enough to soften, but not enough to disguise the bitterness. It was the kind of meal one would eat in obedience, not in pleasure. Ingesting it was likely part of a sacred vow to consume the earth before becoming part of it. These meals also helped scientists understand the seasons of sacrifice. The pollen trapped inside the intestines pointed to early spring, the time when the land thawed, when the first shoots rose from the bog edges. It was a season of renewal, but also of uncertainty. The crops were not yet ready. The weather could still betray. A sacrifice during this fragile time would have been an offering for balance, a prayer that the coming months would be kind. There is something deeply human in that last meal. The thought of hands stirring grain over fire, of someone passing the bowl to the man who would soon die, the warmth of the porridge against the cold of dawn, the taste of soil and ash. He swallowed it slowly, perhaps knowing what it meant. Even now, when you look upon his face behind the museum glass, you can almost see it, the quiet resolve of a man who has eaten his farewell to the world. He did not eat to live, he ate to be remembered. Under the sterile glow of laboratory lights, the bog bodies enter a new kind of ritual. The room hums with quiet machines and whispers of latex gloves. Centuries after their deaths, the chosen dead are once again being examined not by priests or mourners, but by scientists armed with scanners and microscopes. The cold peat that once hid them now gives way to the sharp clarity of technology. In the late 20th century, researchers from the National Museum of Denmark and forensic teams across Northern Europe began to re-examine the ancient remains using techniques that would have seemed like sorcery to the Iron Age mind. CT scans and X-ray imaging revealed details that could never be seen by the naked eye. Broken bones under leathery skin, the shape of a wound, the direction of a blow. Isotope analysis traced the minerals in their teeth and hair, showing where they had lived, what water they drank, and what foods had sustained them. The Tollund Man, it turned out, had lived most of his life within a few miles of where he was buried. His hair showed no trace of foreign soil or distant rivers. He was local, a man of his own land. The Grauballe Man, however, carried traces of different isotopic signatures, suggesting travel or trade across regions. Perhaps he was brought from afar, chosen for his role in a sacred offering. DNA studies added more threads to the tapestry. They revealed that these people were part of the Celtic and Germanic tribes that populated northern Europe in the early Iron Age. Some were related, others not. Each one carried genetic markers common to farming communities, people bound by land, weather, and ritual. Yet, even with all this science, one mystery deepened instead of faded. None of these individuals bore clear marks of defense or struggle. They were not dragged to their fate. They had gone willingly or resignedly into the hands of their own people. In one lab in Dublin, under magnification, a researcher found fragments of mistletoe pollen clinging to a man's hair. Mistletoe, the sacred plant of the Druids, symbolized life and death intertwined. It grew high above the ground, yet was used to bless what lay beneath it. The discovery blurred the line between myth and proof, showing that even in science, faith leaves fingerprints. Every scan, every sample, Every image pulled these ancient people closer to life again. The archaeologists did not resurrect bodies, they resurrected identities. And as each new discovery surfaced, the modern world stared into its screens and saw its own reflection fragile, searching, and desperate to be remembered across time. For every human body the bog gave back, it returned 1,000 objects that had also been swallowed by faith. The people of the early Iron Age did not offer only lives to their gods. They offered beauty, craftsmanship, and power. Each object was a promise, each one a prayer pressed into mud. Archaeologists digging near the Danish site of Illerup-Årdal uncovered what they first mistook for the wreckage of a battle. Swords, shields, and spears lay scattered beneath layers of peat. But there were no skeletons, no signs of combat. Every weapon had been deliberately broken, bent, or blunted before being placed in the ground. The pattern was unmistakable. These were not losses of war. They were gifts to the gods of victory. In the wetlands of Schleswig-Holstein, explorers found wooden idols, carved from oak and birch, their faces expressionless and eyes wide. Some were nearly 10 feet tall, their forms twisted, half human and half divine. Others were small enough to fit in a palm, left standing guard over the bog's edge. The wood had absorbed the same tannins that preserved the bodies, darkening into an almost flesh-like hue. To the ancient mind, these idols were living presences, watching over the place where sacrifice met silence. Gold torques, twisted neck rings of extraordinary craftsmanship, appeared beside them. The torque was more than ornament. It was a symbol of honor and status, a sacred loop without beginning or end. Finding one in a bog meant that someone had given away what defined their rank, surrendering pride itself. In Ireland's Lochnashade bog, near County Armagh, an extraordinary bronze trumpet emerged, still capable of sound after nearly 2,000 years. Its note was low, mournful, the echo of a ritual long forgotten. The people who buried it had sealed not just a relic, but a voice. Every region told the same story. Lakes, rivers, and bogs were thresholds. The line between the human and divine world ran straight through them. The living laid down weapons to end wars, jewelry to gain fortune, food to invite harvests, and sometimes people the greatest offering of all. To cast something into the bog was to let go of it forever. There was no retrieving a gift once the earth drank it, and perhaps that was the point. In a time when survival was fragile, devotion had to be absolute. Today, museum halls gleam with these treasures. Bronze glints under sterile light, gold shines behind glass. Yet their true brilliance once lay in the dark, in the faith of those who lowered them into the peat and whispered to the quiet gods beneath the moss. The bog had become a temple without walls, a mirror between worlds, reflecting both sacrifice and salvation. The modern world meets the bog bodies behind glass. Under the dim lights of museums from Silkeborg to Dublin, they lie in silence, curled as they were when the bog first claimed them. Visitors step closer, whispering without knowing why. The air around them feels dense, as if the centuries themselves have gathered to listen. In the Silkeborg Museum in Denmark, Tollund Man rests in a climate-controlled chamber, his face turned slightly to the side. The first thing people notice is not his death, but his peace. His eyes are closed, his lips faintly curved, the rope still wrapped around his neck. He looks asleep, as if he might wake and breathe at any moment. The room always smells faintly of peat and leather, as if the bog itself follows him. Children press their faces to the glass. Scholars scribble notes. Artists sketch the delicate folds of his eyelids. There is something profoundly unsettling about him. He does not seem ancient. He seems present. His calm expression holds a quiet defiance, as though he knows the world has changed, and yet he remains unchanged. Nearby, the Grauballe Man lies beneath another pane of glass, his skin the colour of burnished oak, his mouth still frozen in the cry that ended his life. His throat bears the deep line of a blade. His hair, still thick and red, glows under the museum's lights. Standing there, one realizes the enormity of what the bog preserved, not just bone and flesh, but emotion, fear, surrender, grace. At the British Museum, the Tollund Man rests in his case, his triple death visible yet inexplicable. Visitors linger before him longer than any other exhibit. They stare not because he is strange, but because he feels familiar. Every face that looks at him sees something of its own mortality reflected back. It is said that the bog bodies are time travelers, their gaze crossing 2,000 years of silence. They pull the past into the present without permission, and in doing so, they force the living to ask questions that science cannot answer. What is faith worth? What makes a death sacred? Why do we still feel awe when faced with the unrotted dead? In each preserved face, there is a conversation between worlds, between those who gave themselves willingly and those who can only watch now. You realize it slowly. Standing in the quiet hall, they were never truly buried, they were kept. And when you meet their eyes, you are the one uncovered. Outside the museums, the boglands still breathe. In Denmark, in Ireland, in the silent stretches of the Netherlands, mist continues to roll across the flat earth. The same cold wind that once carried the chants of sacrifice now rustles only reeds and wildflowers. Yet beneath that stillness, the past remains alive. Each raindrop that falls upon the peat is absorbed into centuries of memory. The water seeps deeper, winding through layers of moss and decay, touching the same ground where offerings once sank. It carries the faint scent of iron and ash, the same scent that clung to the bodies of the chosen dead. The earth does not forget, it only grows quieter. Archaeologists still walk these wetlands, their boots leaving temporary marks that the bog quickly erases. They come with instruments instead of torches, with scanners instead of prayers. Yet the reverence is the same. Every discovery feels less like science and more like communion. Each unearthed face reminds them that the line between faith and fear, between the sacred and the scientific, has never truly disappeared. The bog bodies endure not because nature preserved them, but because humanity cannot look away. We find in them something of ourselves, the hunger for meaning, the terror of oblivion, the hope that something beyond the grave might listen when we speak. The faces behind glass are not relics, they are mirrors. When you leave the museum, the memory follows. You feel the weight of the air, the cool dampness of the earth, the thought that time can be both merciful and cruel. Somewhere beneath the moss, in the black silence of the peat, more figures wait, their stories suspended, their eyes closed against eternity. Perhaps they were never meant to be found. Perhaps the bog, in its wisdom, knew that one day the living would need to be reminded of their own fragility. And so, when the dead refused to decay, they left us a lesson carved in silence, that even in surrender, there can be endurance, and even in darkness, remembrance can take root. The quiet gods of the peatlands have long since vanished, but the earth still whispers their names, one breath at a time.